Dear students, welcome to Interactive Multimedia Model on Development Economics. This is a series of 10 lessons, with each lesson represented by a video discussion. This is your very first lesson where we will introduce you to development economics, and your resource person will be Professor Upala Vidana Patirana of the Department of Social Sciences, Open University of Sri Lanka. Professor Vidana Patirana, welcome.
Thank you, Lal. You might have seen the material, the book, the module on development economics by now. You may also have read the first session and perhaps the second session as well. What we are presenting to you today is based exclusively on your session 1.
Okay, Professor Vidana Patirana, let us begin by asking you a very important question. Could you explain the 3 W's and the how of development economics?
Yeah, the 3 W's, as Lal said very correctly, has what, where, and why, and the last letter H is about how. What is development economics? The first question. Now, development economics is about rapid, large-scale, overarching improvements in the levels of living. And that is what we are worried about or concerned about development. And this rapid, large-scale, overarching improvements must be seen not in anything else. It must be in the standard of living, the levels of living. And we combine both theory and practice of economics to study what is development economics. And the second one you ask is about where. Why is it, why the development economics became so important is mostly because the question is confined to developing countries or so-called underdeveloped countries. And that is those countries in India, those countries in Africa, and those countries in Latin America, where the development levels have not been up to the mark. So therefore, we are looking at the situation of development and why, if there are shortfalls, particularly with respect to those countries and continents. And why? Because we have been seeing these countries are confronted by deep-rooted development questions, which we would be discussing as we go on. So you asked last one how. The how is important because unlike in other economic discussions, we cannot use the normal positive economic tools to describe economics. In the positive economic tools, we do not look at some of the questions that we ask and that we study in development economics. And that is why how is important. We look at how again later.
Okay. Professor, could you take us back to the traditional approach to economics?
Yeah. The traditional and even the current approach to the positive economics is basically that all economic questions can be answered by market forces. And that is the price mechanism. They say that the invisible hand of price will tell you what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, etc., etc. And the government has no role to play. The market will decide, determine, and do what should be done. That is the traditional way of looking at economics. They will describe, they will explain, they will predict economic phenomena in use in the market. And this is known as the mainstream or the neoclassical approach to economics. It assumes that actions, outcomes, and their impact on people can be best determined by the market forces. But the question, as we said earlier, the question with respect to positive economics is that it only look at what is, right? What is happening. But it does not look at why that is happening and what on earth has led to whatever happening particularly with respect to poor countries, and also what should have happened in the poor countries. So development economics, the approach is basically not positive but normative. It is basically value-laden. It's basically value-based. And that is the difference between the traditional approach and the development economists' approach to studying development economics.
Right. So how come the traditional economic concepts cannot be applied to development economics?
In fact, today we have seen that even the World Bank says that some of the traditional concepts cannot be used effectively even to explain positive economics, right? You have seen in the last decade, the markets have been failing. If the market has been failing, that means the price system is failing. And because the price system is failing, you have seen some of the best, so-called best economies in the world and so-called best financial markets in the world have failed. Their prices have come down, or prices have been marked by vicissitudes, prices going up and down. And today, most of the countries still in the developed world have been recording negative growth of rate. Not only negative growth rate, but also unemployment. Not only unemployment, but retrenchment. Not only retrenchment, but also poverty. So, even in developed world, the traditional positive market-based economics have not been effective as you would and I would want it to be. So therefore, the traditional economics tools have failed.
Thank you, Professor. So could you tell us what does development really mean?
Yes. Now, this is interesting question because in the 60s, late 60s, people have started questioning the concept of development. Originally, you will see perhaps in our next session that the concept of development as measured originally using GDP has not worked. And because of that, we will look at it again in the next session. And because of that, some people like, I think it was the famous writer Dudley Sayers in 1969 wrote something on the subject or title called Meaning of Development. He said basically two things. The first thing he said, if in a country poverty, unemployment, inequality have declined from high levels, then undoubtedly there has been a period of development. So if you got to have development, correct? In that country, poverty must decline. In that country, unemployment must decline. In that country, inequality must decline. Then he went to the second point. Of course, he said many more, but the most important second thing he said, I'll quote, but if all of them have been growing worse, it would be strange to call the result development, even if per capita income doubled. So what does it mean? He said, your GDP may be growing, but in your country, if unemployment is getting worse off, or unemployment is growing, not employment is growing, unemployment, people are becoming more unemployed. If poverty is growing, if inequality is growing in that country, even if the GDP increases rapidly, there is no development. So according to Sayers, Dudley Sayers, meaning of development has to be seen not in terms of GDP growth, but in terms of other substantive areas like poverty, inequality, and unemployment.
Right. So in that sense, Professor, how would you actually define development?
Yeah. I would like to go to another writer called Denis Goulet. Denis Goulet was 1971. His interesting book was Cruel Choice, The Concept of Development. He said, this is important because Denis Goulet is basically a sociologist. He said, I'm quoting, underdevelopment is shocking because of the squalor, disease, death, and hopelessness, unquote. He also said, underdeveloping countries or developing countries are characterized by sense of personal and societal importance in the face of disease, death, confusion, and ignorance. If you can see all of these things, according to Denis Goulet, it's a cruel choice. In fact, there's no choice in that, right? So, development, therefore, has to be a mechanism, a tool set, an approach that will make sure that there is no place, or the place for disease, death, and hopelessness has been somehow relieved, eradicated to the extent that is possible. You cannot eradicate death, but to the extent that is possible.
Right. So from whatever you said so far, Professor, keeping them as the backdrop, then what are the objectives of development?
Yeah. Going back to the objectives of development, I think the objective depends on how one defines development, right? Now, we have seen that three approaches already, the GDP approach, the Dudley Sears approach, and the Denis Goulet's approach. All of them have some evolution of coming down from one level to another. So, but unlike in other subjects in, hard sciences, and even in softer sciences like social sciences, development is something that is most difficult to define. What you're asking me is about the objectives. The objective depends on the definition. The definition is very difficult because the context within which we discuss development is context area specific. What you see development as development in America is not development that you see in India. It's not the development that you see in Vietnam. It's not the development or level of development, the situation development, the problems of development that you see in the African continent. So, therefore, the definitions are very difficult to make. So what, I think it was Michael Todaro said, rather than trying to develop a definition, look at the objectives. Look at a common framework. And within the common framework, he said, try to establish some hard, basic concepts which you can use as a framework so that a framework can be applied to any context. You can apply the same framework to China, you can apply the same framework to India, you can apply the same framework to Latin America, you can apply the same framework to Ghana, right? So it doesn't mean that a country is different, that level of development is different. It doesn't mean anything for you. You look at the framework and use the framework. So the common framework will tell you where you stand in terms of development. So one thing very important or very interesting about this common framework is that it has been tested for the last 1.5 decades and it has worked. Right? Not like other concepts, it has worked. It has worked in all those countries that we have discussed. It also has been sufficiently flexible. It also has been sufficiently adjustable. So these are some of the ingredients of this concept of common framework, which made sure that it can be applied across time and across space. So we'll look at the development in terms of this common framework, which look at some kind of variations in terms of expectations. As we said earlier, we have now, for the moment, we are not looking at growth. Growth is about GDP. Of course, very important. People have grown, flowers grow, flower pots grow, trees grow, babies grow, countries grow. But we will not look at the growth as it is for the time being. We will look at something else because the concept of growth accordingly is not sufficient to explain the concept of development. Therefore, it is in a way meaningless. You have seen countries where there had been growth, but there has been social uprisings. Right? if that is because the growth has not gone into the or percolated to those people who are meant to receive the benefits of growth. And that is why the common framework look at core values. There are 3 core values. The first core value is sustenance. The second core value is self-esteem. The third core value is freedom from servitude. So you have 3 core values: sustenance, self-esteem, and freedom from servitude. And these 3 things, although they are separate, in development they work together. Right? You will see sustenance improving, you will see self-esteem of people improving, you will see the freedom of choice of people improving. If all 3 of them improving, you will see there's development. We'll look at one by one if you are okay by this way, this flow of discussion. Right? If you look at sustenance, the concept of sustenance is about basic needs of people. What are the basic needs? Basic needs of you would be different from the basic needs of somebody who is living in Agarpatana, or somebody who is living in, at the moment, somebody who is living in the area we had landslides. But still for all, there are common basic needs. What are the common basic needs? Even for those people who live in anywhere in the world, you have the need to fill your stomach, the food need, right? Feeding the people, feeding the babies, feeding the old people, feeding the sick people. Food is a basic need. The second basic need is shelter. You must have a place for them to live. And that is precisely why when the landslide occurred, the country, the government, the NGOs, all of them have flocked to the area to help people to find suitable shelter. And wherever you have wars, it's the mandate of the UN organizations to provide shelter. That's why they produce and provide tents for people who are misplaced or who have been evacuated from places where the war is occurring. Then you have health requirements. Then you have the protection requirement. More than anything else, to you and me, it's very important for us to have the educational needs of improving the skills and competencies of people. Because somebody said, I think it was the Latin American Christian or Catholic priest who said, you can give a person a fish, but I would prefer to give them the knowledge of how to catch a fish. And that is the competency. That is the education that would provide for. And that is the role of education. So, when you have the sustenance needs or sustenance, self-sustenance, the self-sustenance is important because it provides a command over resources. That is, you will have resources when you have all of them. You will have a set of, according to Amartya Sen, entitlements, ability to buy, ability to get, ability to have, right? So you will have them. And when they are in short supply, when you don't have entitlements, when you don't have sustenance, it makes you absolutely underdeveloped or absolute underdevelopment. And that is where Goulet's disease, death, and hopelessness comes into being. And the absence of that is about deprivation, not having it, deprived of something. One may be deprived of income, one may be deprived of jobs, one may be deprived of security, deprived of esteem, deprived of anything that you think of in terms of development. So that deprivation is something that you would like to remove, and basically sustenance, trying to help ensure that basic need kind of deprivations are removed. Underdevelopment is capability deprivation. To find self-sustained economies must progress. There should be some amount of income growth. That is only a necessary condition and not a sufficient condition. So we'll move on to the second one, and second one is self-esteem. And there's a lot of psychological definitions of self-esteem, but as far as we are concerned in development economics, it's very important for us to know that a person's ability to stand up and say what is right and what is not right. How can you say what is right and what is not right? And that is where you get education. That is where you get skill development. That is where you get competencies. That is where you get the importance of knowledge coming into the picture. So, according to one's conscience, you must be able to say that this is what I believe right, and that is self-worth. And that gives you self-respect. And self-esteem is about, therefore, self-worth and self-respect of individuals. You might wonder why we are discussing these things. Is it going over the heads of us? You can see these things, why they are important if you go and see some of those very poor people in those countries which are affected by HIV/AIDS. Do they have self-esteem? No. Why? Because they cannot even imagine the importance of self-worth when they don't have the self-sustenance, when they don't have security. Self-worth again, therefore, is context-specific. What is self-worth to an American is not what is self-worth to you and me, Lal. It's about acceptance. It's about identity. It's about being part of the society in which one lives. In the university, self-esteem is you may not be subject to ragging. You must be accepted as equal individual. The moment you have introduced ragging into it, you are losing self-esteem, you are losing self-worth. Therefore, there are no universal values of self-worth, self-respect, but you can have your own self-esteem which cannot be given to you by the market. So market fails there. The last item is freedom. Freedom from servitude, which again I think a lot of things written on this subject. If you find time, please read Development as Freedom by Amartya Sen, 1999. Here the freedom is about freedom from servitude and increasing ability to make informed choices. Informed choices of what to buy, not because your television tells you to buy something, not because the advertisement tells you to buy something, or not because the state tells you to buy something, because in some of the countries where there's no marketplace for market, but the government decides what to buy, there's no market choice of your own choice of buying what to buy in terms of material things like clothes, material things like food, material things like shelter. That is given to you, you have to accept it. Also, it has to be freedom in terms of non-material things like, reading what is best for me, ability to read. Expressing what is best for me, that is freedom of expression. Believing in what is good for me, whatever religion or whatever, if you don't like any religion, even that belief you must have the right to do that. You might see that these are not very important to you today, but these things have been important once upon a time in the lives of people in the evolution of history. So, therefore, when you have freedom of choice, there cannot be landlessness, there cannot be social servitude, there cannot be caste-based, ethnicity-based, poverty-based conditions. Therefore, we'll go to the last thing that you asked me, objectives of development, So objectives must be increasing the availability of sustenance goods like food, water, shelter, clothes, medicine at an affordable price, which we call entitlement. First objective. Second objective, increasing the level of living by providing better education, employment, attention to culture, human values, and thereby raising self-esteem. And the third objective, to expand the range of economic and social choices in a country, in a society, in a community, and eliminate dependence on others, other groups, communities, countries that will try to impose values and choices to you. The values and choices will be determined by you. And this common framework, you would now see, can be applied to those who live in Colombo, those who live in the tea estates, those who live in the rural poor areas, those who live in the war-torn areas. So common framework has to work in any context, in any space, across time, across space. Thank you very much, Raj.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Upala Vidhanapatrana. That is the end of the lesson 1 on development economics. We strongly suggest, dear student, that you should read the session 1 of development economics course book. And thank you very much.